God's leadership against Moses and against Aaron. And there was a group, and Korah was the main leader of that group, and we know that God distinguished who his true leader was. And remember, the ground opened up and it swallowed up not only those culprits that were leading, but also their families. And then we see right after that again, the people begin to complain again, and then God says the glory of God fell down upon them, and God's wrath came out, and there was almost another 15,000 people that were killed during that time. And we come to chapter 17, and God is going to make a distinction here again. He wants to really kind of, as Barney Five would say, he wants to nip that in the bud about who his men are and who should be in the role of authority. But I want to ask you before we get to the message tonight, and for you to think about this, and especially as we get over to chapter 20, there's two groups of people that are here. Remember, there's the one group that is above the age of 20, and what has God told them that they will not do? They will not go into the promised land. The only two that he said that were older than that age that would go into the promised land were who? Caleb and Joshua. So not even Moses and Aaron and Miriam were included in that at that point in time. And then you've got the younger generation. That in turn God said if they would follow me and be obedient, then I will lead them into the promised land. So let me ask you this. If you were in that group, in that older group, how would you respond? How would you act? How would your day-to-day activities be? Compared to those, and what I'm saying is, those people know that they're not going to enter into the promised land. That God, because of their disobedience, they will not ultimately enter into the promised land. Versus those that are younger, that God said that the promise was still there, that they ultimately would into the promised land. So you've got two groups of people. I want to just ask you to think about that. How would you respond if you were in that group that knew that you were not going to make it into the promised land? How would you respond to God when God gave direction and guidance?
They had been promised to go into the promised land, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so now they're not going to get to, so I think I'd be disappointed.
Okay, so if God gave you a command to do, would you be disobedient because you're not going to get to go into the promised land? Was that where you were ended, Miss Gail? Oh, okay.
My thing is, if he's already telling me that I can't go into the promised land for my disobedience, I'm going to do everything I can because I want to do that.
Okay, all right. So
the 70 obviously continue to worship the Lord and serve Him. So even though they're not promised the future.
So what I guess my question would be this: is the younger generation watching the older generation at this point in time? And how they respond, isn't that going to impact how they then in turn respond to God? So I would say to us that as we mature, as we grow, that we need to understand that the impact that we have, it not only impacts us, but it impacts those that are coming up with us as well. Because we're going to see, unfortunately, as we get over to chapter 20 tonight, that those that are at that age that would actually get into the promised land, they're beginning to show the same traits, unfortunately, that the older generation showed. And that's alarming to me because we need to make sure that we're doing a better job with the younger generation so that they don't repeat the same things that we do. So I would encourage us in that regard to think about that. So, but
Do you think that maybe the older generation kind of stopped teaching?
well, and that's a possibility because they said, kind of like Gail said, I'm disappointed, so I'm just going to not do anything else.
And this is the first generation of being able to know who God is.
Correct.
They didn't have the past.
To teach them as well. That is correct. That is correct. And we'll even get to something here in just a minute. But in chapter 17, this is still fairly young in the process as far as the people moving. It says then, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and get from them a rod from each father's house, all their leaders according to their father's house. 12 rods. And he's saying, okay, now, we know that Moses had a rod because he used that when he brought the children out of Egypt. But now what he's saying is each one of the tribes, the 12 tribes, I want you to bring a rod, and the leader of that tribe will bring that rod, and we're going to present that before God. Because God is going to show, based upon which rod he chooses, that's his man that is going to be leading from a priestly standpoint. Because remember, Korah's revolt, he wanted to be in the role of priesthood. So God is saying, okay, I'm gonna settle this once and for all right now. So that he actually says this what he says here. He says, and you shall write Aaron's name on the rod of Levi. Remember that Aaron came from the lineage of Levi. And what they would do is they would actually write their name on there, and probably actually the tribe that they came from. For there shall be one rod for each head of each father's house. Then you shall place them in the tabernacle of meeting before the testimony. Which means that they would have brought it into the tent. And actually some scholars say that they may even have taken it back into the Holy of Holies and put it there at that point in time. So those 12 rods are in the place where the presence of God is going to be. And God is going to make the determination. Where I met with you, and it shall be that the rod of the man whom I choose will blossom. And the reason he says this is, what is the reason? He says, thus I will rid myself of the complaints of the children of Israel, which they make against you. So he said, the purpose of that is to do what? To stop the people from complaining. He's saying, I'm making the choice here, and when I make the choice, you need to, I won't just say it in your county words, you need to shut up and be obedient to what I told you to do. He's saying here that you need to understand that this is the person that I want to be the priest and high priest. So, now what's God going to do here? How's it going to turn? What did the scripture say here? It's going to be the rod that does what? Blossom. So again, a rod is what? A piece of wood, but if it's a piece of wood, then it's come off of something, and if it's come off of something, that piece of wood would be what? It would be dead. So again, this is going to be something that's going to be supernatural that only God could do. So Moses spoke to the children of Israel, and each of their leaders gave him a rod apiece, for each leader according to their father's house, 12 rods. And the rod of Aaron was among the rods. And Moses placed the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. Now it came to pass on the next day, Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted, put forth buds, and had produced blossoms and yielded ripe almonds. So think about that. So when Moses goes in, there's the 12 rods, and he looks, and there's one that has done what? Well, okay, so let's look here. It says, so it in turn it sprouted, then it in turn broke forth buds, and then it produced blossoms, but finally what did it produce? It produced fruit. So again, ripened fruit. Now, that's something symbolically here as well. If you're going to be used of God, what does God expect us to produce? He expects us to produce fruit. That's exactly right. So the supernaturally here, he has brought this rod back to life. And in turn, it has brought about the fruit. Some have even paralleled this to the Christ being dead, yet is alive as well. You can even see that over in the New Testament. So we see here that God has truly distinguished before the people, again, without a shadow of a doubt, who the priest is to be. It says, then Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord to all the children of Israel, and they looked, and each man took his rod. So what does Moses do with the other 11 rods? He gives them back to those men for what reason? That's exact. So that in turn should be an indicator to them that they are not chosen. So they've got something tangible that they can hold on to say, God did not choose me in that regard. And the Lord said to Moses, bring Aaron's rod back before the testimony to be kept as a sign against the rebels, that you may put their complaining away from me, lest they die. So again, he's just said here that this should nip it in the bud with them complaining. Now, he says to bring it back, and what it means this will be a memorial. And again, this will be placed in the Ark of the Covenant. Everybody remember what the Ark of the Covenant was? There's three things that were in the Ark of the Covenant. The Ten Commandments, the manna, and now Aaron's blood. And of course it was covered with a mercy seat. So again, the blood covered everything that was under there. So again, it was a memorial to understand that God had provided the law, He had provided the priest, and He had provided the nourishment and things that they would actually need. And God had provided that while they were actually making their journey. So then it says, thus did Moses, just as the Lord had commanded him, so he did. So the children of Israel spoke to Moses, saying, surely we will die, we will perish, we will all perish. And they're talking about, if we complain, then that's what God is going to do to us. And you know, that's what He had done, and if they continue to do it in the future, that's what He's going to do. And then it says, whoever comes near the tabernacle of the Lord must die. Shall we utterly die? And they're asking that question. And again, the answer to that is, if you're obedient to God, no, you're not going to. So He brought that into play in that standpoint. All right. So we see how He has chosen Aaron to be the high priest at this point in time. All right. Turn over to chapter 20. Okay. Now, we're in chapter 20, we're going from a very time has really moved. At this point in time when chapter 20 is written, this is year 38 of their journey in the wilderness. So it's getting down. So during that time frame, that first year or two, now we're at year 38. Now what's happened during that period of 2 years to 38 years? Well, there's miracles, but also what's happened to the people? The ones that were in that sect, in turn, they have died. So we're coming to potentially getting close to that generation dying out, and that next generation now is coming to the forefront, and it's leading the people at this point in time. So it says, then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. So even here, listen, who was Miriam? Moses' sister, yet she dies on the other side of the promised land. And it shows here too that just because she was kin to Moses, that didn't give her any special treatment with God. And in turn, because she was one that, you know, remember when they crossed over from the Red Sea, she praised God. She had the song of prophecy in that regard. But then we also saw a period of time where she wanted to ascend into leadership, and God touched her with leprosy. So she had some good moments and she had some bad moments, kind of like we do at times. But we see here that she did in turn die as well. So this is, I would say this to us to remember this. In our Christian walk, it's good that your mama and your daddy bring you to church and that they're believers in Christ. That your grandparents were. But they, because of them being here in the church, that does not give you a right relationship with God. That has to be something that you do individually. So don't think just because of that kinship that you in turn can be right with God in that same point. There's some that hold on to that generational aspect. Well, Grandma was, and Grandpa was, and because of that, then I'm okay. And you can come, again, you can come to church for 30 or 40 years, but never have a true relationship with Christ in that regard. But then, so she dies and she's buried. It says, now there was no water for the congregation. So they gathered together against Moses and Aaron. Now, who was doing this time? The younger, see, so again, the younger generation now is leading, and unfortunately, they're following in the negative footsteps of the forefathers. Now, what is that when you do the same thing over and over and you expect a different result? So that's what, so they have seen it, they have experienced it, and they have seen the repercussions of their disobedience, of complaining, yet they're doing it as well. And if you really look at this again, it's a cycle. But aren't we like that as well? You would think that we could get this. You would think that the Israelites would get this. But, so it's now, did they have a legitimate reason to be concerned? There was no water. And we know that water is the most important element that we can have. But let me ask you this. Has God already provided for us? Has God never missed a beat? So in this situation, is God going to say, okay, well, it's a water issue now? God had already taken care of a water issue that they had a little bit earlier, didn't he? Would put some stuff in and it made the water clean. So if God, and that's what I want to encourage you tonight. If God is faithful in the past, He's going to be faithful in the future. Because that's who He is. Because if He didn't, it would make God a liar. The Word of God says that God cannot lie. He is not like man. He's the same yesterday, today, and into the future. So in turn, we can have faith in that. But it says that they began to complain. And the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had died with our brother, only if we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. And what they're talking about is those that were dying through the wilderness. They say, oh, he died. I wish that was me over there dying. That's pretty. It is. But we have seen others that have done that as well happen biblically. You remember the story of Elijah? I mean, the great prophet of God who went up on Mount Carmel and defeated the 450 prophets of Baal. God rained fire down and destroyed the sacrifice. It leaked up the water, the rocks, and everything. And the next morning it says, Jezebel says, I'm going to kill you, Elijah. And it says that Elijah went away and hid and said, Lord, take my life. So again, we see here that's unfortunately that we have those moments. But it says then, why have you brought us up the assembly of the Lord into the wilderness, that we and our animals should die here? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It's not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink. Now, some of those, of course, they could have already been in the promised land. But they're complaining about going back. Again, remember, this is about 38 and a half years after they have been out of Egypt, yet they're still thinking back, boy, it sure was good in Egypt. Now, was it really good in Egypt? No, they were enslaved. Now, so Moses and Aaron, remember, Aaron has had a transformation. We've seen that because, so Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of meeting and fell on their face. Because they knew that the grumbling was going to be heard by who? Yes. They knew that was going to happen. So they're doing a preemptive strike, if you would, with God, because it says, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. God says, hey, I told you back in chapter 17, stop doing this complaining. If not, I'm going to have... Then the Lord, we see that God gives mercy right here in verse 7. No, it says, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield water. So what has God directed Moses to do? to bring forth water from a rock, but he's to do it how? He's to speak. Even though he says, take your rod with you, you shall bring forth water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and to the animals. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he had commanded him. So he starts out obediently, doing what God's asked him to do. And it says, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rocks. So he says, hey, listen, God is getting ready to provide. Come and see what God is going to do. But then he had that moment. How many of us have had that moment? We have. And even the great patriarch Moses right here had that moment. Because God didn't tell him to address them like that. He didn't. And we've never seen this before either out of Moses, because normally he had come and been obedient and he had, but this time it was just that, because how does he address them? Hear now, you rebels. He's doing it out of anger. And we remember that was Moses' Achilles tendon, his Achilles heel. Who knows each one of our Achilles heel? The enemy does. The enemy, that's exactly right. He knows exactly where we struggle the greatest at. And that anger rose up in him, because then listen to what he says right here. Must we, meaning he and Aaron. So who has he just taken out of the equation? God, because he said we. So the people are going to say, if this happened before, look what Aaron and Moses did. Bring water out of this rock. Then Moses lifted up his hand and he spoke. And he struck the rock how many times? Twice. Not just once. He wanted to make sure out of anger that it was struck him twice with his rod. Now, what do we see here though about God? God was faithful even though his servant was disobedient. So I want to encourage you, sometimes we may have that servant that has that Moses moment. But I want to tell you that God will still be faithful in that situation. That's important to understand. God still provided what was needed, which was the water. It says the water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. But before we get to the next verse right here, because that happened, who do you think the people are going to acknowledge as being the one that provided the water? Moses and Aaron. Which that means that takes away from God's what? For his glory. And remember, God said this. The one thing that I will not share is my glory. I will not share that with no man. He gave us his son, but he said, my glory I will not share. So it says, now, it doesn't tell us here, but do you think Moses realized? Maybe, because, I don't know about y'all, but in my life, when I do something like that, the Holy Spirit will prick me. Now, I mean, it's like, man, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have said that. He does. Now, that does not excuse us, though, from the consequences of the decisions that are made. So, it says, then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron because you did not believe. So again, being disobedient, the first thing is they have sinned against him. To hallow me, that means that because they're doing this, then in turn the holiness of God, the glory of God has been minimized because it's been taken off of God. In the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore, you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them.
How close were they to the promised land, right?
2 years.
Yeah, they were within a year and a half of getting there. So now, if you were Moses, what would it have done to you? And Aaron as well. So let me ask you this: was God justified in doing Okay, all right, potentially, all right. Any other thoughts on, was God too harsh on Moses?
Just the disobedience.
Okay, so what does that show us in regard, a couple things. One, that shows us that Moses was still a man. And that sin nature is still in man. And when we are disobedient to God, then in turn, then we have consequences. The other piece to that is this, and I believe as well, what was Moses in regards to the people? He was the leader. He was the leader. And James tells us in James 3:1 that leaders are held doubly accountable. So again, to be a warning to leaders to understand that, man, you need to lead appropriately, because if not, the punishment that you will receive is going to be double. And that's why I tell you, when I hear these guys that preach and teach something that's definitely not in the Word of God, how that scares me for them, because the Word of God is clear about that. That there will be a double portion of His wrath upon them. So we see here, but now, if you were Moses and you had heard this, what would you do? Would you say, God, I quit, I'm not going to lead them anymore? Lord, I'm the Lord, so I'm not going to get to go in, so I just quit right now. But we're going to see here, Moses continues to be faithful, even though he will not get to lead them into the promised land. We'll ultimately see here, so we'll get a little bit farther. He will ask God one more time. But God in turn is going to tell him that because of what he's done, that he had to do it. So it says, then this was the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was howling among them. All right. So it says then, now Moses sent messages from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Okay, let me ask you here, the nation of Edom, who is the father of that nation? Esau. So, now what's the connection with Esau and Israel? Jacob, the name was changed to Israel, but yes, to Jacob. So they were what? They were brothers. So this is Esau's descendants here. So these would have been Israelites' cousins in that regard. It says, now, you know all the hardships that have befallen us. Now how our fathers went down to Egypt. We dwelled in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians afflicted us and our fathers. When we cried out to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent the angel and brought us out of Egypt. Now here we are at Kadesh, a city on the edge of your border. Please let us pass through your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards, nor will we drink water from the wells. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory. So in turn, they're asking, can we have safe passage through your land? You're our cousins. Now, how many of you got some cousins still alive? All right. Let me ask you, would you let them come through on your land? Some of them, okay. Now, was there conflict between Jacob and Esau? Yes. I mean, remember that Jacob sold Esau's birthright, and then Isaac blessed Jacob as the firstborn. We understand that, Esau and Jacob mended things, but there were still some hard feelings there in that regard. So it says, then Edom said to him, you shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with a sword. And he said, if you come through our land, we're going to come have war with you. So the children of Israel said to him, we will go by the highway. If I or my livestock drink any, then I will pay for it. Let me pass through on foot. Then he said, you shall not pass through. So Edom came up against them with many men and with strong hands. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passages through the territory. So Israel turned around. So again, if they could have gone directly that way, they could have actually had a straighter path into the promised land. So God still put that barrier because he's going to yearn to his 40 years so that they don't get there any quicker. All right. The king of Ardad, the Canaanites who dwell in the south. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm y'all about ready to say. Never mind. Let me go back up to verse 22. Y'all gotta keep me straight here. Now the children of Israel, the whole congregation, journeyed from Kadesh and came to Mount Hor. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the Mount Hor by the border of the land of Eden, saying, Aaron shall be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land which I have given you to the children of Israel, because you have rebelled against my word at the water of Nebbah. Take Aaron and Ezra, his son, and bring them up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments, and put them on Ezra his son. For Aaron shall be gathered to his people and die there. So, what has God just told Moses to tell his brother? Well, you can't go into the promised land, but also what's getting ready to happen to you? You're going to come up on the mountain and you're going to die. So in turn, we're going to see here that Miriam didn't get into the promised land. Aaron now is not going to get into the promised land. There's going to be a transition here to his son who will become the high priest. Let me ask you this, and would you want to know when you're going to die? Because, I mean, God is just, he said, Aaron, when you come up here to the mountain today, or the day you come up, you're going to die. So he knew when he made that trek up that mountain, that the end result was going to be, that was going to be the day that he was going to die. I don't know how I feel. I mean, again, God, that's what God said here. This is what's going to happen when you come up to the mountain. You're going to die. Yes, because we're getting ready to get that's exactly right. Because through the generational aspect, his son will be the high priest that will lead in with the name. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know. I mean, I would probably be good with that because I know that's when I'm going to meet my Lord.
Well, there's some. I've asked that question different times, and there's folks that have different opinions on that. But yes, he's going to in turn get to pass that to the generation, the next, and specifically to his son. I mean, what a privilege that would be to be able to pass that, his legacy. Remember again, what is the legacy that you're going to be leaving? A lot of people say, well, I'm going to leave them a house, I'm going to leave them cash, I'm going to leave them land. The most important legacy that you can leave to your children is a relationship with Jesus Christ. So we see here that he says, take him up there, do that. So Moses did. Now think about this too. Now Moses has, and I think we may have forgotten about this, and this may have had a little bit of bearing on why he got angry. Who had died right before this happened? His sister had died. So I think sometimes, and now Moses' brother's getting ready to die. And we know that he was close to his brother. So we have to think about Moses, because he was human. And to see the life of his brother pass away. But it says, so Moses did just as the Lord commanded, and they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. So again, the congregation is going to see this transformation here. So Moses stripped Aaron of his garments and put them on Ezra his son. And Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. Then Moses and Ezra came down from the mountain. Now when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, all the house of Israel mourned for Aaron 30 days. So in turn, Aaron got to see the transition of his son. The people, remember, because Aaron was God's man, now they should also respect his son because that has been transferred to his son. And because of that, he will be the one that will lead them in. But it also says they do something that's special right here. What do? They mourn. So that tells us to me that they had love for Aaron. That they took that 30-day period of time to mourn him and in regards to that. All right. We're going to close here and pick up with chapter 21 next week. Your homework, yes, sir. No, because it had been placed in the Ark of the Covenant. It had, yes. Pick up with chapter 21. Verses 4 through 8 or 9 are related to the bronze serpent being lifted up, and how it saves people as they look on it. Your homework assignment is this. 1, what's the positive that you see, and what does that represent over in the New Testament? Secondly, unfortunately, what do the people of Israel do about 200 years later with the bronze serpent that's not positive? That's going to be found in 2 Kings. So that's going to be your homework for next week. So come back and look at that, okay? All right. Any other questions, comments tonight? Yes, ma'am. Well, because it said we, so when it said Aaron, Moses said we, Aaron acknowledged that he and Moses would be the one that would produce the water from the rock. He did not correct him, that's correct. So in turn, the words that others speak also impact us as well. So what he was saying when Moses did that, he was agreeing that he and Moses would be the one that would produce the water, not God. And in turn, the people would say, boy, look at Aaron and Moses because they're the ones that bet our name.
And God spoke directly
Yeah.
to Aaron and Moses.
Yes, so both of them heard that is correct, yes. Is there a motion to move into our monthly